The United States is now committed to one degree or another to war in the Middle East once again. And this goes far beyond supplying another country doing it, in this case, Israel. We actually have sent weapons over ourselves and have dropped ordnance. Things are getting quite messy, and I believe that Trump has tainted his legacy officially. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the ramifications that I think are going to come up, and I'm definitely going to be missing some. So sit back, relax, enjoy this show to the best of your ability with the hopes that we are not getting into officially World War III. And without any further ado, let's get right into the show today.
This thing that's in my brain, it keeps me from wanting to go on, but I want some gain. Baby, a little fame.
So, well, exactly what I've been warning for now going on almost 2 years is playing out right before our eyes. Far from the only one. There are plenty of commentators who have been warning that this is the direction that it seems our government is going, regardless of who is at the head. And yeah, well, I mean, we're just living in a scary time, to tell you the honest truth. I think I mentioned it last week, but I will say it again. Did have somebody come to me and ask if World War III is starting, and my answer was that if it was started, it was started 3 years ago, and that would be with the onset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. As we all know, that conflict is still ongoing, as well as the Israel-Hamas, Israel-Palestine conflict that has been going on since October of 2023. We're in a whole mess of trouble here, folks. It's gotten real ugly, so I'm just going to lay everything out today. We're going to be talking about what happened, about how the U.S. is now further involved here than we have been in anything in the past 5 to 10 years. And we're also going to be talking about the ramifications. We're going to talk about a little bit of background stuff that I think that you guys should be made aware of that I may or may not be the most, definitely am not the most educated on, but bring it to light for you. Maybe you'll like to research it, come back to me. And furthermore, we're also going to talk about why I think that Trump really made a mistake here. So to get right into it, I think we were all hoodwinked one way or another. Trump was not honest on the campaign trail. He ran as the peace candidate. He ran as the one candidate that was going to keep us out of foreign wars, both in his first term and in his second term. And we are not even 6 months in, and we are already committing massive amounts to a military operation in the Middle East, specifically with Iran. And this is it's a scary time because, I mean, as we're looking at it now, we have roughly 3.5 years of President Trump left at the helm with no real clear direction in where we're going. At first, this issue with Iran started with Israel doing the dirty work and doing it with our weapons, of course, doing it with our protection. But now it's escalated to us dropping the bombs ourselves. It goes a far way from being the peace candidate to now Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. And this is, of course, coming out of Trump's mouth, and also is telling that everyone should be evacuating Tehran. If everybody's going to be evacuating Tehran, there's a lot of implications that could be included in that. And it is a scary thought to imagine the other way around. If everybody's saying everybody should be evacuating New York City, well, what could be the purpose of that? It's a pretty scary thing. Now, to be fair, Israel has been doing operations in terms of trying to neutralize Iran's ability to have nuclear facilities running for about 6 to 10 months now. So it's not nothing new, but direct attacks have happened recently, attacks on the upper military regime, and also an attack directly on the one individual that the United States was and President Trump personally was negotiating with, has led to the situation that we're in. So where does this come from? Where does Trump get this big switch? I can't honestly tell you. I can't tell you if he's being bought by Israel. I can't tell you if this is a plan of his that he's always had. If you recall back, it is actually, if I'm remembering correctly, and I could be misquoting this, it was in a debate with Kamala Harris that Kamala came out and she was pretty adamant that the number one threat to America in the upcoming years is Iran. And I believe that in response to that, Trump agreed, or at least was putting on the face that he agreed that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. So this verbiage, the way that Trump has been speaking about this, especially recently, is not anything new. What is new is, of course, the line of actions that he seems to be taking. It has been really unfortunate and pretty sad to watch as someone who I myself am very free to admit feel a clearer conscience in admitting that I voted for Trump, thinking he was not only the better candidate, but one of the biggest reasons that I voted for him was I wanted these wars to stop around the world. And I thought that he would be the facilitator of that. And of course, you expect some bloviating and some exaggeration when he says we can get these wars done in 24 hours. These wars never would have started if I was there, yada, yada. However, going on about 6 months now, 5 months and change of Trump being in power and no budging on the Israel-Hamas conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict, really no change in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It's kind of obvious for me to see that he didn't have the power that he thought he would have. He doesn't have a great ability to influence these world conflicts. And I think that over time, in becoming frustrated with being unable to actually enact the change that he thought he could enact, I think that he has shifted his view from a point of why would I keep trying to negotiate with these people who seem unwilling to negotiate or unwilling to come to my side? And now I'm going to join a side. And I think that's kind of where it's coming at. Does to me seem very hypocritical of him, given how much he condemned the Obama administration, condemned the Bush administration, condemned the Biden administration in their willingness to send drone and missile attacks abroad, especially in the Middle East. And now he's doing the same. Now, there's something that I think that we need to get out of the way here for us to understand what exactly the claim is for why the United States is getting involved here, because I think it's important. I have a bit of a biased view. The way that I'm coming from is I really do think that we belong in this war, and I'll be very upfront and honest about it. And that's why I'm trying to read into this the way that I would. Now, you might read into it in a different light. You might have other sympathies, and that's okay. But I just want to try to lay it out for someone who may not totally understand. So, first of all, you need to understand that, again, Israel has been bogged down with this war between themselves and Gaza, themselves and Hamas, them and the Palestinians, however you want to term it. I think we all know what I'm talking about. They've been bogged down since October of 2023. Now, with that being said, they decided to launch an offensive against Iran. Now, they would claim that Hamas is the proxy of Iran. I would claim, as a counterpoint to anybody thinking that if that's the case, then Israel is our proxy by the way that they claim that Iran is holding proxies all around them. It would make sense that the way that our governments, being the United States and Israel, the way that they coordinate, the way that our government sells weaponry, defense systems to Israel, that by their claim of Iran having proxies such as Hamas, Houthis, if those are equal, then Israel is our proxy. That would be my argument. But again, putting that aside and understanding that that is the background, they decided to launch an offensive against Iran. They were not attacked directly by Iran. Iran did not claim that the October 7th attacks of 2023 were their doing, that they were orchestrated. And they went on an offensive, they being Israel, went on an offensive to, again, take out military leadership, take out high ranking governmental officials. They did not go after the leader of the nation per se. But in what they did, they started retaliatory actions, and they were obviously expected. Iran responded with quite a large missile strike. If you have not seen it, I'm sure you can go look up the damage that has been done to Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. There was, if I'm not mistaken, there was threats of missile attack all over Israel. It was not just Tel Aviv. And with that, you are starting essentially a war, undeclared war, possibly, but a war for sure. And in doing this, as I mentioned last week, many politicians in the United States, Trump included, came out and wanted the support of the people, wanted to support Israel. As I came out last week, I think that it is not a very prudent plan of action in order to just blindly support the nation of Israel, the government of Israel in their action taking, especially because we already are neck deep in funding two wars at the moment, one being what's going on in Gaza and another being what's going on in Ukraine. I think, as we all know, we've been sending billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars overseas to protect people who are not Americans. Now, what the United States is claiming, especially Trump, is claiming that Iran is on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon. Notice that there's a difference there. If you are at all educated on what happened after 9/11, especially in the invasion of Iraq, it was determined and put out as quite a big news campaign. I would call it a propaganda campaign, that Iraq was in possession of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and that would be the reason for invasion. Now, as we've come to find out over the years that is just not true. It's interesting in the shift in language, although it is still the argument, or it's trying to be put forth the argument of weapons of mass destruction or the holding of mass destruction weapons. It has been proven by our own intelligence, and it has been proven around the world, or at least there's reporting from around the world, and it could be inaccurate, so we can always take that as a caveat. By our own intelligence, they do not have a nuclear weapon, and even as stated by Bibi Netanyahu within the last week, they are at least a year to 18 months away from actually getting a nuclear weapon if they were to start developing it. So, my whole point being is that the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, coming from the officials, is that we are recognizing that they do not have a nuclear weapon. They do not have a WMD at this moment. We are attacking preemptively in order to stop them from ever obtaining one. That's where I really have an issue, if I'm being completely honest. I just can't come up with a good reason to attack another nation for something that you think they might do, and they have not proven that they are doing. Again, we had Tulsi Gabbard, who has since been pretty well shut up. I think she came out a couple of days ago or a day ago or something like that, and came and basically hopped onto the Trump train, trying to, I assume, hold on to her cabinet position. Same with Pete Hegseth. Tulsi Gabbard was the most vocal about it. She came out and she gave a report to, I guess it was the, I don't know, Armed Forces Committee, National Defense Committee. It was some sort of committee, and she came out, gave her a report that it is under her understanding and based on the research and based on the intelligence that has been gathered that Iran is not developing and has not developed a nuclear weapon to this point. Furthermore, she came out, put out a video very recently, I want to say it was the beginning of June, and it was very dystopic. It was a scary video. It was a video saying that there are warmongers that have the president's ear, that there are warmongers in the cabinet and in the United States government that are pushing for a war in the Middle East. Basically, a big warning sign. And I believe because of that, that is why her voice has been very, very light as of recently. And that's where we are because of these reasons, because of the determination that Iran is at least producing enough nuclear enrichment, not just for energy, not just for medical supplies, but is actually going above and beyond the percentage that is needed in order to develop weapons if they wanted to. Because of that, we are going to attack. And that's what we did. I sent over 2 bombers, I believe, and dropped off some pretty significant size payloads into, I don't have the exact information, so don't hang me, but dropped off some pretty significant size payloads into nuclear facilities and allegedly wiped them out, according to Trump. I'll never believe him 100% word for word, but I think you get the point. Now, going back to where I think Trump is putting himself into trouble here, I think this is pretty important because this was part of the coalition that he built. There was a huge slogan that has been run for him. I don't even think it was just 2024. I believe it was in 2016 and 2020 as well, that he is America first. America first implies that you are going to be focusing your policy, both domestic and foreign policy, in terms of gaining the upper edge for America, not going out of the way to help other nations. Um, American first implies some type of isolationism. Now, isolationism in its entirety is actually, in most cases, I don't want to say a bad strategy, but could implicate to the rest of the world that we are not going to get into big issues. We're not going to fight. We're not going to get into wars, and we're going to basically allow the world to crumble. So, in some cases, I would say that isolationism is not always the best policy, and usually, probably a mix and not pure isolationism is actually the best way to go. As anti war as I am, forever, Trump has been criticizing endless wars, which we all know that he's talking about Iraq, Afghanistan, and what he was hoping, or at least what he was saying, I don't know if this is actually how he feels or not, if it was just a campaign strategy, because based on the events of the last few days, but I'll pull it back here. Promising diplomacy over military action. And he does seem to be continuing to put out that he wants to take diplomatic action. But my biggest issue with this is, how can you tell someone to come to the peace table when you just dropped bombs on them? I can't imagine us being in the position that we were and getting bombed or being attacked, for example, in 9/11, and then being told to come to the negotiating table. I do not think that that's a position that any American would want to be in. I don't think that's a position that anybody from any country would want to be in after getting attacked. I think you want to fight back. So I think that it's very disingenuous, in my opinion, Trump to be coming off as diplomacy first and saying that these people could still come to the negotiating table when, especially, your lead negotiator just got killed in Iran's case. And not only that, you just got attacked from two nations, Israel and the United States. What a lot of what we're talking about here is how Trump really got elected on an anti-war stance and keeping the world at peace, not just the world, but specifically the United States. And he has gone against that pretty seemingly. Now, I would say that this was, again, this is one of the main reasons that I pulled the trigger for Donald Trump was the anti-war message. But I would say it also is not just me, that it was a lot of the voting base. So I think that it's important to keep that in mind as we go a little bit further and talk about the implications more broadly. And my real question is whether Trump was actually genuine in saying that he's anti-war or trying to approach things from a diplomatic manner, or was it really just a way for him to get elected? Given the fact that he has always been talking about not allowing Iran a nuclear weapon and his, especially in the first term, his pro-Israel stance that has been taken, it leads me to believe that maybe these were just words for him to get elected. Now, all politicians, I think, as we know, will lie to a certain degree or another in order to get themselves in office, and then will do whatever they need to do in office, either to stay in power or able to wield it in the way that they see fit. And that's understandable. I think the biggest issue is when it is on a core promise, something as vital and something that affects as many things as it does as war. Being anti war, going from anti-war to warmongering, pretty steep change. Now, when we were talking about the actual timeline here, it was about June 10th when Tulsi Gabbard was warning of that warmongers when she put out that video. Again, Israel has been striking nuclear facilities directly in Iran for about 6 to 8 months, somewhere around October of last year, not 2023. And around June 15th was when we saw Trump really drive the rhetoric point home of, we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We have complete control of the skies over Iran. And when he sent out that cryptic message, and I would say very upsetting and scary message of evacuating Tehran, you see all of that sometime in the timeline about June 15th to the 16th, and then you see us dropping bombs by the 20th of June. So what actually happened here, I think Israel was applying quite a bit of pressure. I don't think, I can only imagine that that's the case, being as though Israel attacked first. It was claimed that after the initial retaliation by Iran, that Israeli defenses and Israeli counter missiles were running quite low. Now, there's something for us Americans, we've always heard this term, the Iron Dome. It's important for us to understand that that's actually not the primary defense against something like a full-on missile barrage. When you're talking about missile silos going off like they are from Iran into Tel Aviv or across Israel, an Iron Dome is really more for, in the nicest way, the low-powered rocketry that may be coming from somewhere like Hamas, coming from inside Gaza. You're talking about another nation state that has full capabilities of a nation state and the ability to launch lots of warheads at the same time. You need a bigger system. That's where you hear, if you ever heard of like the THAAD systems, believe there's another one, it's like a Slinger or something like that. Whole point being is that these other mechanisms are not only different, they're more expensive, as I'm sure you can imagine, and they are harder to produce. And we do not produce all that many of them, given as though we are not on the verge of missile attacks from enemies really ever. So our supply of these is obviously pretty limited, as claims by Netanyahu and the Israeli government coming over that they are essentially running out of these defenses kind of pushes the United States into a act or step out of the way type of mode. And it's clear that at this point we have acted. A lot of the hawkish figures, I will call them, in the United States government, specifically some people like Ted Cruz or Lindsey Graham, have been advocating pretty strongly, not just against attacks. And I think this is important too, not just attacks on nuclear facilities, but also attacks on the regime in Iran and aiming at regime change. And I think that that is going to be very, very important when we go forward into the later part of this show. Keep in mind that regime change has always been on the mind of Westerners, especially people in the United States, higher up military officers for quite some time. To what seemed to be the goal in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and other places around the world that we will get into again in a little bit. Given that we have had, and I think this is another important point, given that we have had over the past, I'll say 15 to 20 years, I'll put it back quite a bit of time, quite a few domestic issues popping up all over the country, whether you're talking about homelessness, drug addiction, the immigration crisis, all of these issues being, I think that you could throw in there too, economic issues such as inflation, but many more. You bring in all these issues, it is hard to focus on internal issues and domestic issues when you have so many foreign ambitions or foreign issues that you're trying to take care of. Hence the Ukraine and Russia war, the Israeli Hamas war, and now this with Iran. What it's going to do, what it's already done, is take away the spotlight from the domestic issues that have been going on in the United States. You know, protests like the No Kings protests that we talked about, protests about immigration, or just trying to handle the immigration problem or try to tackle issues with our domestic economy. And it kind of shines that spotlight over to something else that gives not only people in the media, but politicians and the people of the United States something else to talk about without focusing on the issues that we're dealing with right on our own doorstep. That's why, in some cases, I think it's important to, I don't want to say be cynical, but maybe think about the ulterior motive of actions like this, of military actions like this. Could they be used, or are they being used in this case to divert the American people's attention away from the issues at home, the issues that Trump and others have created at home, and shining a light on another part of the world in order to get the spotlight off of them? It's very possible. And I think it should be kept in the back of your mind. What I think when we're going back to the original reason for attack that I think a lot of people are going to use, I don't think anyone realistically is going to come out and say that we are for regime change here. We're pushing for a regime change war. I think you need to understand that a lot of what it's going to be sold on, what this war is going to be sold on, is the nuclear problem. The claims made by Trump, again, they contradict what Tulsi Gabbard was saying in about March, is when she gave her testimony. And what it kind of all says is that there is a level of trust that has not been reached amongst this giant coalition that Trump has built. Whether you're talking about pulling in people like Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., all these different types of minds and people who really are not conservative or Republican, if you want to say it that way, people who have ideological differences. And when you're setting yourself up with that and not being willing to take information from them, as it seems Trump is not, you're leading yourself into a position to be making a lot of decisions either by yourself or by your key advisors that you trust more than the intelligence community. So I think it's important that we realize that although Trump put together a coalition in order to get elected and elected pretty sure-handedly, it may have been pretty foreseeable that it was going to lead to issues such as what is going on now. I'm not saying that you could have predicted. There are some people who are claiming, and they actually have predicted, that Iran would be unfolding in a similar way as it did. I'm not saying that that was easily predicted. I don't think it was. I, for one, was not on the train of predicting Iran itself being attacked. I was, however, very much predictive of, we got to be careful with escalation here. And it seemed pretty clear to me that when the war wasn't over in a few months and has dragged out now to about 15 months, might even be longer than that. It is longer than that. How about more like 16 to 18 months out with Israel and Hamas? When the war drags out that long, it's pretty easy to foretell that there will probably be escalation elsewhere, not just in that small area. It's going to become a regional conflict, and I believe that is what it has become at this point. So as Trump kind of goes against the ways of his internal cabinet and the coalition that he's built, what you're going to see is a lot of rift building. I'm sure you're going to be seeing firings and replacements very, very soon, whether that's Gabbard, Hegseth, or whether that's less important positions being taken over and filled with people who are going to be supportive of his military action. I think you have to be on the lookout for this very soon. Now, something that came up last week that I think was majorly influential on not only the politics in America, but to get a feel of where everybody's at was there was an interview that was conducted by Tucker Carlson, who I think has been doing I will say a pretty damn good job. Definitely not perfect, but a pretty damn good job recently of shining a light on the war powers in the United States and the wielding of them. Whether that's talking about Russia and Ukraine, he went out and talked to Putin quite a while ago. He has talked to people on both sides of almost every issue. And he actually interviewed Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, for those of you who may not know, is a senator from the state of Texas. And there were quite a few takeaways from this interview that I think were eye openers for myself and for a lot of people online. Of course, could be talking about a lot of bots, so I'll caveat it with that. But all over places like X, there were people showing clips, showing how they felt about it. And I gotta be honest, Ted Cruz did not come out looking good in this interview. I'm going to give you guys a few key takeaways. I highly, highly recommend that you go and listen to this yourself because I think it will, if you're able to think about things clearly, I think it will steer you in a direction that you are maybe understanding the backroom talks and the political divide that is happening amongst people in the United States and people of power. So Tucker Carlson, he has been claimed as an isolationist, which I don't think is exactly true, but he was a MAGA voice. He was leading the charge. He was one of the people that was speaking on the behalf of the president, trying to get him elected. And he has been pretty critical of the United States involvement in the Israeli Palestine, Israeli Gaza, Israeli Hamas conflict. In doing so, he's been extremely critical of the United States getting involved in Iran. He was talking out on his show before he actually had this interview with Ted Cruz against people like Cruz, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin. If I'm not ringing any bells there, it's good. That means that you're not listening to people who have been influential since the days of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. But what I think it's important to take away from were some very key points made by Ted Cruz and what actually brings him to the fold. He was talking a lot about, well, a lot of what the issues were centered around was what's going on with Iran, and he's talking a lot about Israel. Actually opened my eyes to see just how maybe not America first someone like Ted Cruz actually is. It was a little bit scary, if I'm being completely honest with you. There was a point in the interview when Ted Cruz called out, I apologize, when Tucker Carlson called out Ted Cruz and said, well, what is APAC and haven't you received money? And Ted Cruz got very defensive about it, went off to claim that they do not lobby on behalf of a foreign government, which I think is a blatant lie. He also went off to claim that even though they are our ally, we should be expecting that they're going to spy on us and that we spy right back on them. To me, this was making me feel pretty uncomfortable, given as though someone in our government was at a position to freely admit, it seems, that they're totally fine with allowing allowing another nation to influence our politics and not call it out. And on the other hand, especially with the spying stuff, to be okay with it. You would think that someone in that position of power would either try to cover up the fact that there are spies or would call it out as a bad thing. There was really no admission of guilt there, and it was deeply concerning from my end. Now, there was other viral clips that went along. One of the big, like, oh, Carlson got him one was on the population question of Iran, which I do think is important. Don't get me wrong. When you're thinking about waging a war and you're a senator and you have the ability to get in the ear of the president or the ear of committees, I think it's important that you understand if you're going to take an offensive just how many people you may be affecting. I do think that's important. But I actually think that the follow up was more important. And that is, what is the ethnic makeup of the country, of Iran? Because if you're looking at something like a regime change, which, as I've pointed back to, nobody's going to come out and say it, but I will go on a side tangent here. There was an interview of Bibi Netanyahu by Brett Baer, I believe, in which he was asked, is the goal of this war regime change? And he didn't say that that was the goal, but he said that it would be a good thing if it happened, which, I'm sorry, but I think we need to be honest about what that means. I'm of the opinion that if that's the case and that's the way he's feeling and he's going to announce it that way, it sure does seem like that might be a goal of this total operation. Now, with that being said, Tucker basically got Ted Cruz to admit something of a similar ilk, claiming that this is not a regime change war, that is not the main goal, but it would be good if it happened. And with that, bringing up the fact that Ted Cruz doesn't even know the ethnic makeup of the people that live in Iran. And I do think it's important for this reason. If you are looking at a regime change, if you're looking at shifting the politics of a country of that size, which is somewhere around 90 million people living there, if you're looking at that, it is important to understand who would probably be either ruling the nation, who might have the largest stake if it was something like a parliamentary, which I could not imagine ever happening. Or I think it's also important to understand that if someone got in power that is dangerous, who would be in line to be in danger? I think that's very, very important. And when it comes to United States on Iran, it seemed that Tucker kind of got Ted Cruz to admit that he would be in favor of that, not boots on the ground, which is just the same rhetoric that keeps coming out. And then I thought a big point of the show that was called out was that, and it wasn't called out by Tucker, this was called out by Ted and admitting this to the audience, was that one of the main drivers of him getting into the Senate was to be, quote on him, this will be a paraphrase, but his words, that he wanted to be the number one defender of Israel in the United States Senate. And I think Tucker brought up a great point when Ted Cruz got frustrated that Tucker kept asking questions about Israel and saying, basically insinuating that he was anti Semitic, saying that he was obsessed with Israel. And Tucker kind of fired it right back at him, saying, well, I'm the one who you're claiming to be obsessed with Israel, yet you are the one who claims that the number one driver, one of the number one reasons to get into the United States Senate was to be the number one defender of Israel. I think hearing that coming from a United States senator is so disheartening, to think that this person wants to be a defender of another nation above our own. And that's the way it came off. That doesn't mean that's how he feels, but to be honest, that's the way it sounded. And I thought that that was very disheartening. I thought that did not make me feel good to know that this person is representing a pretty significant block of people, being as though he's one of two senators from the state of Texas. It did not make me feel great about his election there, the way that he runs things, and the way that his mind works. And to kind of finish out the point of how Ted Cruz was formulating his thinking, I think one of the best exchanges between the two in this interview, it might have even been termed a debate by now. One of the best exchanges came when Ted Cruz decided to recite a part of the Bible. First of all, he misquoted it, which is very funny, in my opinion, being as though I am a Catholic, I'm a Christian myself. But he came out and he said that to those who bless Israel will be blessed. Tucker called him out on a kind of minute point, which I don't think was necessary, saying that, well, do you even know what line that's from? Which he didn't. And that's fair. I think the bigger point was that Ted Cruz was equating the modern day state of Israel with the Israel that was mentioned in the Bible, a piece of writing that is more than 2,000 years old. Of course, this is coming from Genesis, so it is not the New Testament. So it is significantly more than 2,000 years old. And the flaw that Tucker pointed out in this thinking is that, well, that is not the same thing. And supporting a government of Israel that has been created starting in 1948 is not, or being critical of that government is not the same thing as being critical of Israel in the Bible. Being supportive of that government is not the same thing as being supportive of that group of people in the Bible. I think that's a great point. And I think that it dismantled any real notion that Ted Cruz either knows what he's talking about or has any real ability to bring in scripture when he's talking about his points, because he shouldn't have to. He should be able to argue on the basis of real reasoning and facts in order to make his case that the United States should be supporting Israel, and rather than quoting scripture, again, that is alluding to an area or a group of people that existed 2,000 years ago, and not a group of people that are a part of a government and a state that it was created, roughly 70 years ago. It's a bad look, in my opinion, a terrible look on Ted Cruz's part. And at the end of the day, what I took away from it was that Ted Cruz is after many goals that are not in the interest of America, yet he claims to be America first. He claims to be a part of MAGA, which this group of people, in my opinion, doesn't really exist anymore. Make America Great Again was a great slogan, but has not been enacted very well at all, whether you're talking about the absolute debacle that was COVID policy, whether you're talking about the inflationary cycle, whether you're talking about now propagating wars across the United States, across the world. There are many different facets of what Ted Cruz was saying, and he really did not, in my opinion, come off very American. It was upsetting, but it was very truthful, truth telling. It kind of told me what might be the overall feeling in the Republican Party and with the conservatives, in quotes, that are standing on Capitol Hill. I'm going to take a quick break here and I will be right back. We will talk about, after the break, the possible escalation that could be coming on from attacks with Iran. We'll talk about more about regime changes and where that may be coming from. And we will we'll finish off with just the deep state and how this seems to be affecting the United States. So stay tuned. So, when we talk about the broader implications of what war with Iran means, it's very important to keep in mind all of the ongoing events around the world. Number one, keep in mind that there is a coalition of nations called BRICS nations. BRICS nations include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What these nations are is a loosely affiliated group of nations that are both economically tied, militarily tied. There's a lot of talks about them wanting to build a coalition that could actually counter something like the UN, NATO. At the end of the day, realizing that there is another coalition of nations other than the West. Implicating these nations and getting them tied into the conflict would be not good. Again, an attack on Iran could be seen as a direct attack on the BRICS nations. I don't know whether that's to be the case or not. That's actually to be determined, but keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the actual direct conflict that ties in Iran and Russia. Now, with Russia being tied down already with Ukraine, one would think that they already have enough on their plate, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to, them being Russia, that they don't want to try to help out a somewhat of an ally. If they're going to be helping out their ally, of course, us getting directly involved with a conflict that is having Russia on the other side is not going to be a good look. And I think keeping in mind as well, us being the United States, being tied down in as much as we are, supporting Ukraine, supporting Israel in its war being waged on Gaza, and not only that, now jumping into another conflict in the Middle East with Iran, it really bogs down the ability of the United States to have its eyes and ears out elsewhere, not to be call it the conservative trumpet or being the call out, the one that we've been hearing for years, but it does give a very, very big opening to a place like China in terms of them thinking that they can make a move on something like Taiwan. So us bogging ourselves down, getting ourselves so tied up, opens up other opportunities. Again, whether that is something like Russia coming in, whether that's Russia actually having a more direct line to Ukraine, given that we are ourselves tied up in the Middle East. There's a lot of implications here that need to be considered, and why I am still against really military action in this conflict, or most conflicts in general. Now, Iran has the ability to reach with their weaponry a lot of our bases in the Middle East, so that's something to be considered. And getting American citizens involved, never know what that implication could be. If there's direct attacks on American civilians, American citizens, American military members, do you see a massive response on behalf of the United States? And what does that look like? There has been a pretty long history of Iran being anti-American, and now with the continual aid of Israel in its fight and our own fighting in Iran, we are going to have issues cropping up all over the place that are, well, again, I'm not trying to come off as pro-Iranian. I hope that you can understand that as the listener. I hope what you're hearing from me is a worry that we are spreading our tentacles too thin and too widely in order to actually focus on the things that matter, especially the domestic problems that we face here in the United States. And as I start mentioning all these regions that can be affected, I hope you're starting to see or starting to realize that if you look back on history, if you're a history fan, if you like following different events, it's starting to look in a different way, but a lot like what happened in World War II. Whether you're talking about the Asia Pacific theater that could be happening between China and Taiwan, and again, that is a trumpet kind of thing, a right wing talking point. But I don't think that it's misguided. The amount of pressure, political and otherwise, being put onto Taiwan from China's angle has been steadily increasing for quite some time. And I don't think it's out of line to consider it as a possibility, and especially given the fact of just how much the influence of China has spread all over the world, specifically in Africa, in the Middle East, and the rest of Asia. I don't think it's out of line to consider that this could be a time that an attack is considered or just some sort of operation against Taiwan. I also think that you could see parallels given that we are talking about efforts in the Middle East, efforts in Europe, efforts in Asia Pacific, as I mentioned. And you tie all this together, and it sure as hell looks a lot like a world war. It does not look like an isolated conflict, isolated regional conflicts, because they're cropping up all over the place with supporters from all over the globe. Whether you're talking about the United States propping up Ukraine, whether you're talking about the United States propping up Israel, whether you're talking about the United States propping up Taiwan, we have our reach everywhere, and now it is getting tested, I believe. So I think that these other implications that are coming out of the woodworks at this point because of all the conflicts going on need to be considered as a part of what is the plan going forward. And again, it's another reason that I myself, and I'm just a commentator, I'm just someone giving my thoughts, but I am an American, and I am of the belief that it is not in our best interest to pursue any sort of military action in any of these cases. We have enough issues at home. We have things that we can focus on, and without our money, Israel would not be able to be going on the way that they are militarily. Ukraine would not be able to be going on the way that they are militarily. Now, as we look forward and what this means, or what we can take a look back on, I should say, and maybe take a 30,000-foot view, take that airplane view down, I think it's important to look back on a pretty influential piece in someone that was very influential. That would be Wesley Clark. Wesley Clark was a former general, I believe. He was the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. What he did post 9/11, this was in a 2007 interview, was that he laid out a plan that he had seen that was allegedly to take out or to instigate regime changes in 7 countries in 5 years. Now, the 5 years plan is way gone, but I think you kind of, make an analysis in terms of what we're seeing with the Trump thing and how he thought he would be making all these grand peace plans across the world in the first day or first week of him being in office and not being done. And you can see how a 5 year plan might turn into a 25-year plan. So when he laid out the 7 nations in 5 years that were looking to be taken down, you're talking about Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. And the only one to this date that has not been affected in terms of a regime change since him seeing these plans has been Iran. And that really makes someone like me, or I think a lot of commentators as well, start to think that, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this might be the overall goal, the overarching goal of this campaign in Iran. Find a way to instigate, find a way to at least sell it to the American people to some degree or another, and try to topple this regime. And that's where I think I'm coming from. That's where I think that the war is headed. I do not think that the nuclear weaponry, or the threat of nuclear weaponry, given that they do not have any signs of weapons of mass destruction at this point, being Iran, that's where I think this war is coming from. It's what I think the goal is. And again, with Bibi Netanyahu coming out, I think it was last week, mid to late last week, coming out on Brett Baer and admitting that he would be in support of regime change, even though it wasn't the main goal of the strikes in Iran. I think it kinda comes out and says it without saying it, that this would be the goal of the attacks. This would be the goal of having an offensive in Iran. Now, with all of that, I think it's important to take a look at what the progress of this plan is and why I would bring it up. So Iraq, of course, we invaded in 2003. We toppled Saddam Hussein. Libya in 2011, actually intervened and got rid of Muammar Gaddafi. I think most of us as kids remember that. There's quite a bit of a fuss even as a child. Syria has been going through civil war forever, and getting rid of Bashar al-Assad, as we actually talked about on a show, I want to say late last year, somewhere in December, is what that is at this point. Lebanon, Somalia, and Sudan don't have direct ties, but all of their regimes have been toppled and are in turmoil even to this day. And when you look at it, Iran is the last one left. It's the last pillar of that 7 countries. That's why I think that it's important to actually think about what this could mean and why it might be a little bit more important than just, oh, they're getting nuclear weapons. This could be actually carrying out someone's plans that have been in place for decades at this point. Now, when you look at the more insider things and why I think it's important, I guess, to take a magnifying glass and understand why, from my point of view, we shouldn't be involved here. You got to look back to that coalition that was built. You have people like Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Elon Musk coming together and trying to get Donald Trump elected. You would expect Donald Trump to be taking all these people in and not necessarily listening to them and let them guide policy, but listening to what they had to say. Maybe they have something to say, not necessarily on something as important as national security, whereas in Tulsi Gabbard's case, you might want to listen to, but in general, where I think where the rubber meets the road and where it actually comes down to making policy decisions, Trump has not followed really any of their suggestions. He has not gone down any roads, whether you're talking about the cuts that Elon suggested, whether you're talking about not going after Iran specifically because they are not in any way, shape, or form close to a nuclear weapon, as Gabbard has suggested. Whether you're talking about going after the pharmaceutical industry or vaccines, as RFK has suggested, there are so many things that make up this coalition that Trump is seemingly not paying attention to now that he actually has the throne, so to speak. And that's not to say that I think that he's a king. It's not to say that I would participate in these No Kings protests. After all, I do have a job. But my whole point in actually bringing that up is he is running this place without really seemingly taking any sort of suggestion from some of the smartest minds that we have in and around the government of the United States. And I think that it actually makes a pretty big impact on how our policies being enacted both in the country, whether domestic or whether talking about foreign policy. There are other threats, especially long term, looking at China, looking at Russia, if you want to be an anti Russia person, which I find myself somewhere near the middle of. But there are so many different places that have so much more of a possible impact on us as the United States than Iran does. And the focus that has been dialed in, laser like focus, I should say, over the past couple of weeks is indicative of, I think, something else going on. And I think that it is actually the biggest arguing point that many people have made, including myself, that the deep state, in scare quotes there, has a lot more control over the nation and our politics and our policies than we want to admit. There are people who have been entrenched in this government, who have unelected positions, who have been there for decades and decades, have no ramifications, have no issues when things go wrong, do not catch the blame, and they run the nation. They run the underside. A lot of them are lawyers. A lot of people write up the laws and just have our politicians sign them in. This is where a lot of the issue comes when you think you are electing someone like Donald Trump who might be sounding anti-war until get to that moment where it actually means something. And I think that, again, I think that there will be a reckoning here for the people that are going against or have gone against Trump, whether you're talking about Gabbard, Musk already being out. I don't think that that was a kick out situation, but look at the turmoil that that caused. I really do think that Trump is going to be making people get in line or get out, and I think we'll be seeing that soon. Now, when it comes to what MAGA represents, what Donald Trump represents, this is where you're shattering, and this is where I think Trump is actually making his legacy, so to speak. I think I mentioned it last week, but if I did not, this is the deciding factor, and he already committed. He already committed, Donald Trump being committed to military action in Iran. If that is the case, and it is the case that he has done so, his legacy is now not the peace candidate. It's not the person who made up all those deals in the Middle East that are now torn to shreds. He's not the person that brought economic flourishing to the United States. He's the person who brought us another war. And, we've yet to see. We still have time to wait to see if he can negotiate something. But as I said before, if you got to imagine that if you were that country that just got bombed, how willing would you be? How willing would you want your politicians to be to come to the negotiating table, or would you want to retaliate? I just don't see it as a possibility. And I'll be honest, I think that Trump made his bed. And with this, you're seeing a real fragmenting of the coalition that he built. As I've been mentioning this whole show here, I think it's important to reiterate, Tucker Carlson ripped Ted Cruz to shreds. He's been talking against Trump, not necessarily bashing Trump, but saying things that are not pro-Trump for quite some time now, going on a couple of weeks at this point, saying how he doesn't support military action in Iran. He's been having people on who support the notion that we should be calling this out from the American perspective. And people like, Steve Bannon, has come against, and he even came on Tucker Carlson's show and explained that there's a lot of energy and momentum behind the pro-war faction. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not that I am a true supporter of hers, but she has come out as very anti-war with Iran. I think that that's fantastic. And then you have the other side of the division where you have Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, people like Mark Levin coming out and basically shaming Americans into supporting this war. And I do not think that that's popular. Now, you will have a certain amount of people across America that voted for Donald Trump that will listen to him and follow him like a puppy dog, no matter what he does. And I grant you that. I think that that's the case no matter what side you're talking about. And I kind of talk about this often. I don't know if I talk about it too much on the show, but I talk about it with a lot of people that I'm very confident with, that there is a certain percentage of the public, whether you're talking about on the right, voting more with the Republicans, the conservatives, or whether you're on the left, you're liberal, you're voting with the Democrats. There's a certain percentage of those people of both sides that will vote no matter what. You know, the blue no matter who, the red till you're dead type people, right? I do believe that. And I do believe that no matter what these people do while they're in power, they will not get criticized and they will not get flack. They will not get voted in. They won't not get voted in by these people no matter what happens. However, most people live, other than these extremes, and I hope you're watching this video and not just listening, but if you are, I'm making a little bit of a sign with my hand showing that this is a small percentage. The majority of the people in the United States are somewhere in the middle, and the majority of Americans, as I get the feel, are not for this war. They're not for war, period. And a lot of those people actually went to the Trump side in the previous election, and you are alienating these people, especially by shaming them, by saying that you are pro-Iranian because you don't want this war. If you think that I'm pro-Iranian, I think you need to look at the name of this podcast once again. The whole point of this, of doing this whole thing, is to try to keep the people who are misinformed, the people who are jaded by the mainstream media, and keep them in the loop on things like going to war in the Middle East, keeping them in the loop on things like Donald Trump's policy across the board, and just in I'm just blown away by the decision making here. I really, really am. And it really upsets me that one of the main reasons that I voted the way that I did this past election was to avoid things like this. And it seems like we're getting dragged right back in. Now, I think it's also important to take a look at public opinion. Polls do show differing opinions. Now, if the poll is termed as should Iran have a nuclear weapon, it's about 70 to 80% no across the board, Democrat or Republican. However, if it is phrased that should we get involved with a war in Iran and no nuclear war is mentioned, it's well below 50%. So terming and the rhetoric is very important in selling this war, and they know it. That's why they're trying to sell it the way that they are. It seems like Thomas Massey's taking a stand and trying to block unauthorized attacks in Iran. And frankly, I kind of agree. I think that it would be fantastic to take the power of war waging away once again from the President of the United States. Now, that does not mean you cannot respond to attacks, and that is a different story. We did not get attacked here. I think that if we were to launch strikes against Iran, if we were to attack their nuclear facilities, I think this should have been passed through the Congress. I think that every single person who has given their vote, there might have been a lot of people who abstained from a vote on the federal scale and not voting for president, but voted for their local representative. I think that everybody in the Congress should have had to vote on these and not just the whim of one person. I think that that's detrimental to the United States and the fabric of the United States and what we were able to build for so long, having to pitch this stuff to Congress, like going to war after being bombed at Pearl Harbor, right? Just how much FDR had to fight in order to get us there. It's not like he was trying to, verbally, again, he was anti war, but when it came down to it, he didn't seem to have any problem with it. It was the ability of him to A, win elections, and B, be able to get the Congress involved and get them on board. Now, when you look at what this all means, why I think this kind of affects Donald Trump, his legacy and whatnot, I want to just call you back to the beginning of the show where we were talking about him being an anti-war candidate, him being the peace candidate, the one that's going to solve the issues around the world. And instead of negotiating peace deals, doing what he had to do, making concessions, and maybe getting our allies to make concessions, he's done the opposite. He has led the charge in continuing to fund places like Israel, places like Ukraine, and he has also led the charge in now instigating stuff, whether you're talking about Iran or pushing massive trade deals or I should say, trade wars with China, he has been very instigating with our adversaries. And this is not what I voted for, if I'm being completely honest. And I have no issue saying that. I have no issue saying that this is not the president I thought I'd be getting. This is not the person I was voting in. And I think that a lot of Americans would agree with me. But I would like to know what you think in the comments. Do you think that this is representative of what Trump is going to be over his 4 years? If we get tied into a world war, a worldwide conflict, which it seems to be heading in that direction, we have been saying for years, to be fair, but I think we had good reasoning. I think there was some foresight into a possibility of expansion of conflict as we're now seeing today. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that we have any way of getting out of this? Because I would love to know. Again, when I look back on it, if my country was to be attacked by two nations, that being Israel and the United States, but wipe the slate clean and say, is my nation being attacked by any two nations at the same time? I don't think I would come to the negotiating table. And I would really like to see a good case being made for them, being Iran, coming to a negotiating table after this has happened to them, because I do not really see it as a possibility. And yeah, so I do think that attacks on Iran, and given how critical he was, him being Trump, of presidents before him, even Biden, who split his terms, how critical he was of their handling of foreign affairs and really their running of the country in general, and then going and doing some of the same things. Well, it seems very disingenuous for him to be talking. It seems very disingenuous for him to be pursuing any of this policy, because he was supposed to be that outsider. And now, as many people have made the argument before me, and I honestly am starting to side with, Donald Trump is the establishment. He is part of the deep state, and you're not really getting any different no matter who you vote for at this point. And that is, it's a sad thing to say, but I think it's very important for us as the American people to recognize that that is what we are dealing with right now, and come together, I think, to vote these people out. Vote out the people who have no problem sending our boys over to get slaughtered, for sending our boys to conflicts that have really no implications back in the homeland. We have enough problems at home. Obviously, we saw riots, we saw protests getting out of hand over the past few weeks over stuff that is also the post policy of the president of the United States. And given as though we are not extremely supportive of the way that it's being handled right now as a nation, I think it's very important to put people in power that can carry out the policy that we're looking for in a way that is actually going to get the job done, rather than just causing more problems. And I do think that it's going to be very, very hard for Trump at this point, if he's going to wage this war and instigate with Iran. I think any sort of policy that is being pushed on the domestic front is not going to be able to get done, because you just need to get so many people in line with this war thing that everything else kind of gets put off to the side. I want to know if you guys agree with me. Let me know in the comments. Like up the video if you liked it. Hate on it if you didn't. And otherwise, I will catch you guys next week. I hope you have a great week, and I hope that we all don't get drafted.
Damn, I wish I were the fucking state. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.